Hello, troublemakers. Welcome to this week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast. I am your host, Lynn Fields, and this week we will be highlighting Ella Mae Wiggins. Ella Mae Wiggins was born September 17th, 1900. Shout out to the Virgos. In Sevierville, I hope I'm saying it right, Sevierville, Tennessee. Her parents were James and Elizabeth Mae. She was the second of 12 children. The family they were farmers and they harvested corn, yams, cabbage, beans, apples. And her dad hunted a lot for opossums and rabbits. Like, these are the descendants of Davy Crockett, right? The family moved a lot. They were very proud, but they moved a lot, and they worked in different areas, of Sevierville, just farming on different lands. In the late 1800s, the railroad industry started cutting through the Rocky Mountains, and this brought the timber industry to town. And the logging industry, is where the family started making their money. So this is when James, her dad, started working there. He started working in different logging camps, and they moved, every time the work would move, they would move with it. Ella Mae and her mom, they contributed to the family by washing the clothes of the loggers. And Ella, who was a talented singer and songwriter as well, would sing songs around the worker camp at night. When Ella was 14, she married a 23-year-old, yes, y'all heard me, 23-year-old logger named John Wiggins. And a year after they got married, their first daughter, Myrtle, was born. The family lived near Ella Mae's family, but not for long, because within 6 years, Ella's parents and 4 of her siblings all died from sickness, illnesses, or workplace injuries. Actually, with logging being so dangerous, Ella Mae's father actually died in a tragic logging accident. Now, the logging industry, it was declining. So Ella Mae and John, they found themselves, moving around, and they finally moved to Gaston County, North Carolina, which at this time was the, king of the textile industry. And they were looking for work, so this is how they ended up there to work in the textile mills. So like you guys probably can imagine, the pay at the mill was terrible, but the family really needed the money. So John and Ella both worked there. They chose textiles because the textile mills, normally would hire women as well as men. So that's why they both ended up working there. And Ella worked really, really hard, but John turned out to be a bum ass, right? So he was basically, an alcoholic, and he would leave for days and or weeks at a time, usually with Ella Mae's money, just out here, John was for the streets. Like, do y'all have that girl at y'all job who gets dropped off at the job in her car, and then her man leave in her car for the day to go do what he gonna do, whatever bums do? And so, yeah, this was what John was giving. But Ella, she continued to work. She's married, she's a good wife, but like we just established, John, not a good husband. And one day in 1926, he was just like, girl, I'm finna go get some milk. And then he left and never came back. So that leaves us Miss Ella. She's 26 years old, and now she's got 5 kids on her own, and she's a married single mother of 5 kids under the age of 8. But our girl, she was in survival mode. So she's working at this mill. She's working the midnight shift for $9 a week, 6 days a week, 60 hours a week. And so she's getting off, and she's trying to get the house together, and she's trying to get some sleep just to go back to work. Because I guess, back then ain't no Netflix, ain't no Hulu, so ain't shit else for us to do but go to work and have these kids. But to her credit, Ella Mae was very headstrong. She was determined to maintain control over some part of her life. And she refused to actually live in like the mill owned houses. And instead, she rented a home in the black part of town called Stumptown. And she also worked at the town's only integrated mill. So, troublemakers, at this time, like about 8 miles up the road, there is a mill called the Luray Mills, and it's located in Southwest North Carolina, in this little town called Gastonia. About like I said, 8 miles from where our girl Ella Mae lives. And because of this company, they're owned by some folks that are like out of New York. But the owners, they built here because of the potential for a large workforce with the failed, the farmers that failed to be good farmers and the ex-sharecroppers. Luray, was one of the many factories that opened up in this area because textile mills, they had great success, with World War One, because the Defense Department, they needed uniforms, they needed tents, they needed all kind of war materials. So the wages at the time were at an all-time high. And, a lot of people in Gastonia worked there. But after the war, the industry, it started to suffer and profits started to decline. So management, in all its infinite wisdom, they decided to cut the workforce from about 3,500 to 2,200. And then they increased the workload. They called it stretching out the workload. And that means that they just added more work to the people that was left there. And then they cut wages. And they cut wages upwards to 50%. One worker was on record as saying, quote, 3 years ago, I tended 48 looms. Today, I'm in charge of 90 looms. I was making $19 a week. Now I'm at $17.70. Some mill workers' wages have went as low as $5 a week. End quote. So the work became very dangerous and dirty, and a large percentage of the workforce, which were women, they rarely had time to go home and even take care of their kids. And then management, because they're scum, they put this, it's called a Hank clock, on all the looms. And what it did was it basically just tracked how fast you worked. Like just like at Amazon today, they're tracking how fast the production is being done. And then they would pay them wages based on how fast they worked. So of course, after hearing about these, conditions at these mills, it caught the attention of the National Textile Workers Union. Now, this was a union that was ran by communists. Like they were openly ran by communists. And this union, they started focusing on the Luray Mill and the mills, in that area. They wanted to start organizing them. And one of the leaders of this union was a man named Fred Beal. Fred Irwin Beal was an organizer for the Textile Workers Union. He's credited with introducing communism to North Carolina. He was born in Lawrence, Massachusetts. He had worked in a textile mill at the age of 14, and at 18 years old, he participated in a strike over wage cuts. His work earned him a reputation as a really effective organizer. So Fred drops down in Gastonia to organize the Luray Mill. Now, mind you, our girl Ella, she doesn't work at this mill. She works up the road, but, she also, she hears about this unionization and she catches the bug. She wants to do everything that she can, to help unionize these mills, because she knows that she's going to be on the right side of history if this works out. So the union comes to town and they start making demands. Y'all know how we do. So now the union is making a demand for a 40-hour work week, $20 a week for each worker. Men and women get paid the same, which, oh my God, radical ideas, right? And, quote, no more damn Hank clock, meaning stop clocking our motherfucking work, right? And of course, the mill told the workers to go pound sand. So on April 1st, 1929, nearly 2,000 workers at the Luray Mill walked off the job. And even though, again, Ella doesn't work there, she could have just said, this ain't my circus, not my clowns, but she didn't. In solidarity, she was one of the first ones to walk off her job as well, in solidarity with the Luray workers. And the American Mill, the fellow workers from American Mill in Bessemer City, they started giving money, to support the strikers. And it was a very, very successful strike. Like, none of the strikers had to starve because the other mills around town started giving money. And because, of course, our girl Ella, she got fired when she walked off the job. She was given a job with the union to be their secretary and to keep the books. And she started going to the picket lines. She started singing the songs. She started writing all these songs about, administration to help keep morale up. And, she was described by one of the organizers as, quote, a person of unusual intelligence, which is okay. I guess I'll take that compliment, and she really understood, that solidarity and their strength in numbers was going to be the way to go. And Ella took it upon herself because, remember, she lives in the Negro part of town, right? And so she's going and she's getting all her Black neighbors and all her Black friends. Like, she's was the only one that could really convince them to start signing up for the union. And even to the union's dismay, they were like, hold up, we said solidarity, but not like that. And so they were like, okay, the Blacks can come to the union meetings, but, it's going to be segregated. They have to sit on another side of the room. And this kind of pissed Ella off because she was like, okay, y'all saying solidarity, but you're not acting real solidarity. It's not giving solidarity. So, it was reported like Ella May, she would sit on the Black side of the room. So good for her, because sometimes, I can show you better than I can tell you.
Hey, it's Chris Garlock from the Labor Radio Podcast Daily. We're proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. More than 200 labor radio and podcast shows across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where the people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
So while doing my research, troublemakers, I found that someone had quoted that Ella May was a woman of, quote, unusual intelligence, which I thought that was really funny because, like, okay, I'll take that backhanded compliment. She was even chosen to be part of a small delegation to go to Washington and testify before the Senate about the conditions of the textile mills. And when it was the union's turn to get up and speak about the conditions of the mills, the Senate was like, we are adjourned. Can I get a motion to adjourn? And then they adjourned. So Ella cornered the senator from North Carolina in a hallway, and she let his ass have it. She was like, oh no, you gonna hear me, and you gonna hear about these working conditions. Now the mill owners, they definitely retaliated. They kicked the tenants out of mill-owned homes, and so the workers, they created this tent city right around the factory and on the outskirts of town. They hired mill thugs to harass the strikers on the picket lines. And, but again, they weren't starving because they had the support of the other mill workers around town. And a lot of the confrontations and the altercations between the police and the strikers, a lot of them, they turned violent. And so, there were a lot of arrests of strikers, around this time. Ella May even discovered that, one of the springs that was used for drinking water had been poisoned. And when she went to Luray to report the incident, she found that, that there were people trying to steal things from Tent Colony. So in response, the strikers, they increased, security around Tent City. On June 7th, 1929, some deputies, they came to a union rally to break up a picket line, and it was mostly women and children. Well, later that same night, there was another collision between the union and some policemen, and shots rang out. We don't know who, shot who or who started the shooting, but the chief of police, a man named D.A. and Aderholt, he was killed. So as a result, 71 union members and organizers were arrested and held in the Gastonia City Jail for 1 week. The majority of them were released, but 16 defendants were detained in jail for 6 additional weeks before being indicted for the shooting. One of those people that were indicted was our boy Fred. Remember Fred, the organizer from Massachusetts? Fred was one of those union members. And the people that paid for their defense were the International Labor Defense Fund. They were the ones that were handling, the defense for them. And while they were in jail, our girl Ella, she led like the protests outside the jails, and she would sing songs. And remember, she used to write songs about the people that were protesting as well as management. And one of her songs, that she sang about the shooting, it went, and y'all know, Lynn does not sing. I'm not singing. It said, quote, "Come all of you good people and listen to what I tell. The story of Chief Aderholt, the man you all knew so well." And then she'd start singing this song, about things that happened. And then at the end, she said, quote, "Toiling on life's pilgrim pathway, wheresoever you may be, it will help you fellow workers if you join the ILD." And this was like one of the most popular songs, as far as protest songs. But her most famous song was a 6-verse ballad that she wrote called "The Mill Mother's Lament." And it basically documents her personal struggle in trying to work and support her kids. She says, "We leave our homes in the morning, we kiss our children goodbye. While we slave for the bosses, our children scream and cry. But understand all workers, our union they do fear. Let's stand together, workers, and have a union here." I love that. I absolutely, love that. So like I said, guys, Fred and a bunch of other union leaders were all charged. And there was a mistrial. Then there was a retrial. And then this time, Fred was found guilty. And he was sentenced to, I think, between 6 and 20 years in prison. But while he was out on bail, he skipped town and fled to Russia. Because Russia. So basically, troublemakers, everybody was found guilty, right? And everybody was given these lengthy prison sentences, because after that police chief was killed, most of the town's elite, they definitely started siding with the mill owners. And even the governor, who was a mill owner himself, sided with the owners. And the local newspapers, they wrote that the strikers were un-American, they were unchristian, and they were immoral. The papers, they also took issue with the women strikers, especially because their claims were, let's talk about the list of claims against the women strikers. They claimed that the women were too independent and outspoken. They dressed like flappers. They had bobbed hair. Not coming after my bob, y'all. They wore short skirts and men's hats. And since they had no jobs, they didn't contribute anything to society. These were the papers. Kind of like the papers today, sounds like. On September 14th, 1929, Ella May was, she was scheduled to sing and speak at to a group of strikers at one of the rallies in town. So her and her man, she had a man at this time, Charlie Shope, because no, she's not divorced, because divorce was not common back then, but abandonment was. She had her man, Charlie, and like 22 other unionists all got in to kind of caravan down to this rally. And, right before then, the mill had just deputized like a whole bunch of, new deputies and vigilantes, and their job was to disperse the rally. But they also set up roadblocks along the road so that they could scare people off and tell them, don't take your ass to this rally. So Ella May and her group, they're traveling. She's in the back of the truck, and there's this roadblock up there. And so they tell them, they said, y'all best bet is to go back home. So Probably, I'm thinking some words was exchanged because y'all know that these unionists, they are not no punks. They are some communists. They probably talking slick, but they did turn around and they're going back. But for some reason, the vigilantes and the strike breakers, they took chase after them. And then there was a chase down the road. One of the cars sped ahead and blocked off the truck that Ella May was in. And so he broke, he had to brake his truck really hard to make it stop. And some of the protesters, they fell out of the back of the truck. And witnesses, remember y'all, this is all in broad daylight. It's early in the morning. Ella May is standing off to the side of the road, trying to gain her faculties. And although the union protesters were unarmed, the vigilantes were, the strike breakers were, and they opened fire. And Ella May, she was struck and she was killed. And she fell into the truck, and her last words were, "Oh my God, they've shot me." She died in the arms of Charlie Shope, who had been standing near the truck. Now, the other strikers, two of them were wounded, but nobody else was killed except Ella May, which made the strikers and the unionists believe that she was targeted because of the songs that she was singing and the fact that she was trying to integrate the workforce. At the time of her murder, Ella was pregnant with her would have been 10th child, but she was survived by her 5 children: Myrtle, age 11, Clyde, 8, Millie, 6, Albert, 3, and Charlotte, who was 13 months at the time. And of course, troublemakers, we could count on good old John Wiggins to stay on brand and not come and claim his children after the murder of their mother. And the union attempted to take custody of them. However, the state interceded and put all 5 children in orphanages after changing their last names to May, so that, folks from the union couldn't find them and, adopt them secretly. So I don't know what happened to the kids after that. 6 weeks went by after the murder, and no, bills or articles of indictment were ever returned for the killing of Ella May Wiggins. But after, the ACLU and, all of these other national organizations started putting pressure on the governor, who again was a mill owner himself, he reopened the investigation. 5 employees of the Luray Mill were indicted. And despite the existence of 50 eyewitnesses, the men were acquitted in a trial held in Charlotte in March of 1930. Ella May was 28 years old when she was murdered. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the Public City Cemetery. 50 years later, in 1979, an organization did eventually place a marker on her grave. After Ella May's death, the strikers slowly started returning back to work. Some would say that the strike was not a success, but they did get the hours of work reduced from 60 hours a week to 55 hours a week. I guess it kind of sounds like it kind of just lost its steam, after Ella May's murder. And not just lost its steam, but we have to remember that these folks were probably scared now, because now it's like one thing to, fight the police and protest, but it's another when you watch one of your friends literally get killed in front of you. So I'm sure that impacted the strikers greatly. So troublemakers, like I said, the strikers went back to work. The Luray Mill, closed down in 1933. I believe Firestone took over it and started making tire cords for tires. Today, it is a luxury loft, and it has apartments and stores in that building, so it's still standing. Our boy Fred, he eventually came back from the Soviet Union after about 4 years, and he turned himself in to the authorities because I guess, over there it wasn't as, fun as he thought it would be. So he turned himself in, and he, he got his sentence pardoned for his part in the strikes that killed the police chief. And today, North Carolina has one of the lowest unionization rates in the U.S., with 3.3% of workers represented by unions as of 2023. So yay for union density. And that, troublemakers, is the story of LMA Wiggins. I really hope you guys enjoyed, this episode. And now comes the part of the show where I give my flowers. And this week I want to give my flowers to a group. Yes, I have done group flowers before. And this week, the flowers are going to go to a group of people out of AFSCME Local 674. They are a conglomerate that covers, Decatur and Bloomington, Illinois. And they have this, little group of ad hoc officers, kind of like a little coalition. And this week's shout outs, our flowers, are going to go to Heather Stanhouse, Ronnie Franklin, Michelle Celestine, and Ashley Rentmeister. And I'm going to tell you why. Because these folks are literally trying to, reorganize, reframe their local from the ground up. Right now, they don't have an operating body of their local, but they're acting like that body, right? They're just going to act in those roles of president, vice president, and e-board members. And I just really, really admire their tenacity, the fact that they still organize these union meetings. They're like over 200 members in this local, and these four are literally just carrying them on their back. And the respect that I have for this group of people, when it's time to show up, show out, speak up, speak out, they are the first ones on the front line, and they represent that local so well. And I'm just so excited, to watch them come into their own as activists. And I just appreciate the work that they are doing, to help this local thrive and exist, right? So, Ronnie, Michelle, Heather, Ashley, these are y'all's flowers. And if you would like to give flowers to someone in your local, someone in your community, because we do not wait for people to no longer be with us. We do not wait for them to retire. Please write to us. Write to us at resolvedlaborpod. That's resolvedlaborpod@gmail.com. We will be honored to read one of your letters on the air. And don't forget to, to rate us. Don't forget to follow us, like us, review us, and share us. Or you can just tell somebody you don't like and waste their time. Thanks again for listening, troublemakers. As always, peace and solidarity. This week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast is produced by The Create Place Studio. You can find them on all social media platforms at The Create Place STL. We Won is performed by Joe Jinks and written by John O'Connor. This has been Resolved Labor Podcast. As always, peace and solidarity.
Everybody come and join in the union. Begin. Stand together to overcome soon.